right, welcome to our latest webinar. Today we have Joshua Dunlop with us. He is a creature designer based out of the UK, and he's done some really incredible work using Keyshot. We'll get a chance to see some of his work today and discuss some unique ways he uses Keyshot as a tool within his larger creative workflow, but I'll let him tell you a bit more about what he does in a moment. As usual, a little housekeeping before we get started. If you've been a part of our webinars before, I'm sure you've heard me mention our Keyshot Luminaries community. It's a great forum for Keyshot users to connect across the globe, share ideas and feedback, and even practice your skills with our regularly posted challenges. It's also a great place to keep up to date with our new releases and participate in our betas. And quickly, before I pass it over to Josh, I wanted to plug our Keyshot 3D YouTube channel. We regularly post quick tips and tutorials on our channel, as well as all our webinars after airing live. You'll find this webinar up on our channel by early next week. So if you missed anything or you want to come back to something that Josh touched on, keep an eye out for that. We've also introduced a new series on our YouTube channel called Keyshot Pro Tips, where we feature learning content created by designers and visualizers throughout the industry. So if you are a Keyshot user or you're a content creator and you'd like to share some of that knowledge with the rest of the Keyshot community, feel free to reach out to us. And on that note, a big welcome to Joshua Dunlop. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, glad to have you here.
Well, thank you for inviting me onto this. And Keyshot has been a huge influence in my work throughout my career, basically. I will just share my screen here. Oh, 1 second. And so you can see some of my work here. This is my art station. I've had the pleasure of working with loads of different companies, from Disney to Netflix. Most recently, I worked with Royal Mail and the Natural History Museum on some stamps. I could actually show you some of those here. But yeah, it's been a wonderful journey, and I think a lot of people might know me for my realistic Pokemon work for a project that I've been doing, personal project called Pokemon Zoology. And throughout that entire process, I've used Keyshot to render all of my images, and it's been a godsend, to be honest. I'm definitely using it outside of the context of what a lot of people use Keyshot for, because I'm a creature designer. I think a lot of people kind of associate Keyshot with kind of hard surface projects and showing off some really beautiful designs of like watches and whatnot. But for me, it was more about the UI and the design that I kind of wanted to use. And when I started, I decided I was going to check it out. And the thing that really jumped out to me was Keyshot Bridge. Now, I am a concept artist, so all of my stuff is mainly kind of illustrative ideas that I put forward to directors and producers. So none of my models are designed to be used for animation or anything like that. So Keyshot Bridge allowed me to take my models, which I could just fully poly paint and not have to UV or retopologize or anything like
Yeah.
that, and I can just drag it and drop it straight into Keyshot with no problem. So yeah, it's been absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Did you actually run across Keyshot from using ZBrush and the Bridge product that was there? Like, how did you kind of end up at Keyshot, or did you use something else previous to that?
Well, I've tried a few different things. I tried the in-house renderer of ZBrush, which is good, but it's quite complicated. I mean, a lot of the stuff of ZBrush is quite complicated, to be honest. It's a fantastic tool, but it takes a long time to learn.
Yeah.
So one day I was kind of looking for new renderers, and Keyshot popped up, and I just thought, oh, let's give it a go. This looks amazing. I think before I did anything, I watched some tutorials on YouTube, and what I loved about it was just how easy it was to understand, and how simple it was to kind of get what I needed in terms of lighting and texture and everything like that. So yeah, I was very excited. And then as soon as I found out, I think it was actually, I had started trying to use Keyshot just before the Keyshot Bridge had started. So I was actually rendering out every single individual part of my models
Oh
and
man.
taking them into Keyshot and then reassembling them, which, as you can imagine, took quite a long time.
Yeah.
Um, so as soon as Bridge was announced, I was just there like, yes, yes, please, yes.
Yeah, honestly, the plugins are a godsend. I didn't use them very much when I first started using Keyshot back in design school, and like once I started kind of getting more familiar with Keyshot, started using because I'm a SolidWorks user, and I've tried using ZBrush. Like I'm an industrial designer, so when I'm modeling things, I make the joke that industrial designers are often rendering making boxes of different kinds and cylinders of different kinds. So
Yeah.
sculpting outside of like my friends who are shoe designers, sculpting is a little foreign to me. So when I jump into ZBrush, it was a bit of a learning curve. I got to give it another chance. But yeah, it's pretty incredible what you've done with it. I've seen some of your work in that book that you sent us. It
Oh
is
yeah.
incredible work. I
Oh, thank you
appreciate
so
you
much.
sending that book our way.
Oh no, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, it's something that I've recently released, and you can get it now on the Etsy shop. So it's got all of my Pokemon pictures in it, but just a little bit of self promotion there.
Yeah, and that started as a Kickstarter campaign, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's because I basically the whole thing started back in 2016. So I was wanted to learn how to use 3D modeling and everything. A good friend of mine had said, this is something that you should really try. I think it would really work for you. So I sat down. I was like, I'm going to learn the hardest program on the market, like from scratch, and just try and figure it out. So I spent about 3 months just kind of learning ZBrush. And the way that I did it was just following tutorials, but copying exactly what they were doing rather than kind of trying to adapt it to my. I felt like that was the best way for you to kind of learn a new program, rather than just trying to do a project of your own and then adapting it and
Mm.
trying to go, well, how do I do that? Is fully familiarize yourself with the like program and then start on your own project. So that's exactly what I did. It came to the end of that 3 months, and I was like, right, I need a little project to try out on my own. And Pokemon Go, the game on the phone, was just coming out,
Yeah.
and it was Pokemon was everywhere.
Oh
So I
yeah.
thought, oh, well, that'd be great. That's like, a bit of nostalgia for me. I remember getting the first Pokemon Red when I was a kid, and hours playing on that on the Game Boy. So I thought, well, why don't I do that? Well, why don't I take Pokemon but make them realistic? Because that was where my forte was. I'd always loved doing creatures and whatnot, making them look realistic. So I started off with the starter Pokemon, which actually I could show you here. So I've got Bulbasaur. Now this was the first one I did. Sorry, this one here. And yeah, I think as soon as I did it, I was like suddenly amazed that I was like, wow, this is something that I can actually create. Everything I've been doing up until that point had been like pencil or digital paint. Yeah,
Mhm.
digital painting. So when I used 3D and I kind of was able to do this with a bit of matte painting and whatnot, I was so excited. And I did the other two starters, and I didn't really know what to do with them. It was just supposed to be like a personal like practice run,
Mhm.
really. And I showed it to a friend of mine in London. He's a games designer, and he was like, you know what, you need to put these online. People would really love them. And I was like, well, okay, didn't really think of it. He suggested putting it on Imgur. I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah. IMGUR. That's the
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that one.
Imgur.
I don't know how to
Sorry.
pronounce
Neither do
it.
I.
So I thought, yeah, I'll put it on there. It kind of looked like a kind of a Reddit-esque post thing. Didn't think anything of it. Went to bed, and the next morning he calls me up at like 7 a.m. and he's like, it's got 400,000 views. I was like, oh,
Crazy.
okay. And it just exploded. I had interviews with people from all over the world. I had job offers. I suddenly I didn't really even have social media at that point, so I started up social media, and then those exploded. And yeah, it was just kind of this big thing for me that I was like, okay, well, should I keep doing this? Is this something that I should keep doing? And it for me, it was actually really wonderful way of like pushing me out of my comfort zone and giving me something that kind of people love and gets attention to me, but it's something that I really enjoy as well. So yeah, so I carried it on, and from that and posting these pictures online and then being shared everywhere, I've got to work with Disney and Netflix and other companies like that. So it's been a godsend. So and then like it was last year, I think it was last year that I finished the final 151. Obviously, there's over 1,000 Pokemon now. People keep going like,
Oh
"You've got to
yeah.
do all of them." I'm like, "I'll be an old man, and I'll still be like Gen 78." I'll be like, "Please stop."
And they'll make another 1,000 by then too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
I know they
exactly.
just released the Pokemon 151 cards, and I kind of I threw back to my childhood and bought a bunch of those. But I mean, even me, I'm like I was comfortable with the 151. That's what I grew up with. Some of these I don't even know what the heck is going on. I know one of
Exactly.
our coworkers
Yeah,
loved Mimikyu, so he'd run around with a Mimikyu shirt all the time.
yeah.
But yeah, it's
But
amazing how things kind of come full circle, right? You know?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think if I look back at myself as a child, and I actually vaguely remember myself going, God, I wish someone would like make these look realistic. It'd be
Yeah,
so cool. And then to be kind of one of the people that actually did it is quite wonderful, to be honest.
that's
So
awesome. Yeah, were those some sketches of your Bulbasaur underneath?
yeah, so the way that I usually work is that I'll start off by doing some rough sketches and some ideas and kind of explore different options. And then once I'm kind of happy with that, then I start exploring like the scene and I start looking at like what kind of like layout and stuff that I could do with that. And do some color tests
Very cool.
so that I can kind of once I get into coloring and painting it all, I have a clear direction because I have had a few models where I haven't done this and I've gone in and I've just painted a whole model like full detail, gone, I don't like it. I'm going to start again. It's just such a waste of time. So I do it. So being able to paint these like this is a really good time saver and a good way for me to experiment um, which direction I want to go with the final model. But yeah, and then I finally jump into ZBrush and I start sculpting and eventually take it into a Keyshot, light it, render it, do subsurface scattering. I've got a few examples of that actually that we can jump into in a second that I can
Cool.
talk you through. So some of the interesting ways that I have used Keyshot outside of its maybe kind of original in purpose or intention to use it for. So it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I am a self-taught artist. You know, I have done my master's in concept art. Funnily enough, throughout that entire process, they didn't like 3D whatsoever. So wouldn't let me even touch 3D at that point. So the thing that's actually kind of made my name known, I actually taught myself after my master's, which is quite
Nice.
funny.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's interesting. Like schools can be a little obstinate when it comes to adopting new things. I mean, even as an
yeah,
industrial designer, I graduated less than 10 years ago, and I mean, I think it was like my third term or like almost halfway through design school, where before I started using like digital sketching, everything was Copic markers, pencils, pen. I was like, listen, at some point, I'm going to be presenting everything on an iPad. We should be doing
yeah.
this from the
No,
start, you know?
exactly. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, that's the thing with education is that you have teachers, and don't get me wrong, they're usually incredibly
Oh yeah.
intelligent, very well versed in what they're doing, but you know, they're not working in the industry at that time. So they're teaching these students stuff that can be quite dated. And I remember when I was doing my master's, there were certain points where I was like, I don't feel like we're really up to par with what is expected of us in the industry. So I set up a little club like to the side and was like said to everyone in my class, it's like, hey, we're going to come together and we're going to watch some tutorials of some of like the industry's best and we're going to talk about it and figure out how they did things and blah blah blah. Because I don't think we're going to be taught some of this stuff in the class. No, that's again, that is nothing against the teachers, nothing against the course. I thought it was absolutely fantastic course. Um, but sometimes, you know, you have to take things into your own hands, I guess.
Course.
Um, but yeah, we and it, I learned a lot through that process, and I think having the time to actually, you know, put the blinkers on and go, I'm just going to do art for like a solid year
Oh
was
yeah.
really wonderful for me. I think it was what I needed because you get very distracted by everything in the world, and I think you know having a course that you can go, I'm just going to stick my heels in and just get on with it is a really good way to kind of improve your own personal skills. Um, I think one of the things I get a lot of you know young artists coming to me and saying to me, oh, like you know what master's courses did you do or what did you study? I mean, it's like I studied acting and directing when I was in uni originally. And art was always like my hobby, and
Mm.
then it's just completely flipped, and now art is my career. So I say to people, like, you can go to, do a university course or a college course or whatever you want to do if you think that's going to be beneficial to you. But at the same time, if you feel like you have, the patience and you have the self-discipline to kind of go it alone, then there are some incredible tutorials out there. There's some incredible courses that you can follow with very, very talented artists,
Oh yeah.
which at first glance may seem expensive. They might be like £1,200 or something along those lines, and you go, "Whoa, that's a lot of money." But then if you're looking at a college course and you're going,
Yeah.
well, that's not even a term,
Tens of thousands of dollars
and
there, you
yeah,
know?
exactly. Especially in the US, it's
Yeah.
insane.
Oh yeah.
So
I don't want to talk about my student loans.
do I. But yeah, it's I think I say to them, no, if you really want to learn and you have a very specific direction you want to go in, then you can teach yourself. You can do these self-teaching courses and learn from some of the industry's best. And they are currently working in the industry, so they will
100%.
upfront tell you what you should and shouldn't do. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting direction that you could take instead of going down the traditional education route. So
Yeah, and even there's so many paid courses, there's so many free courses now, and YouTube University is a real thing these days. I mean,
yeah,
if you don't know where you want to go and you're just interested and curious, like YouTube is free. There's so many
yeah,
opportunities to learn things and explore things. I mean, and it's interesting that you say you kind of, your undergrad, your beginning education was a little different than to where you ended up. Same thing with me. I For the first 3 years, I studied like a generic degree at our state school here, and then it wasn't until I was almost done with my bachelor's that I decided to kind of, you know what, I'm going to drop everything and I'm going to switch to design because I've been doodling and creating artwork and building things my entire life, and that's a hobby. So you and I have a very similar experience on that front.
no, exactly. And I think that there is a real fear with a lot of people where you may have started your path down one direction, and there are like it's
Completely.
terrifying idea to go, well, actually I don't want to do that anymore, I want to do this. But I think there was like probably a good 70% of people who studied at university are not technically using
Yeah.
the stuff that they're using now, but you do learn a lot in different ways. Like I would say, like through the acting and directing course, like I learned about character, I learned about relationships, I learned about scripts and stories and everything. So that when I did start working with, feature film directors and stuff, I understood it. I understood the concept. I understood what they were looking for in terms of the designs of the characters and the emotion that they want to express and the scenes that they were looking for, the atmosphere and whatnot. So, I never think that my university course was a waste. I just think that I used it in a very different way than I thought I was going to. So
100%. Yeah. And on top of that, being in an area where there's just so many creative people doing creative things, it's just a wonderful environment.
100%. Yeah, 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 exactly. I think actually in my masters, I think I annoyed most people because a lot of the artists that I was working with are quite introverted, and coming from a like kind of a drama background,
Yeah.
I was just like, "Hey, what are you doing? Let me see, show me." They're like, "Oh God, who is this guy?" But yeah, no, it's a good thing I think to get yourself out there and try new things and do different things, even if it means that you're going down a different path. So
100%. I couldn't agree more. You showed me a few images of some of the work that you've done recently. It was Muck and Rapidash and a couple others, and there was some
yeah,
pretty cool uses of materials. I don't know if we
yeah.
can pull those
Well,
up.
let me grab some of these. So one of the ones that you mentioned before was mud. So let's grab that and let's open this up. Well, here we go. I've already got it up. Um, so muck is obviously not a real creature. It's very little that I could pull from in terms of the real world. As you know, there's other Pokemon out there that is like, Rapidash is a horse. Magikarp is a fish. So there was a lot of reference that I could pull from. But with Muck, I was having a lot of fun just trying to experiment and think like, what could I do? to make this thing look like it could be a real creature. But one of the things that really stood out to me, or something that really kind of inspired me, was that I really loved this oil slick rainbow effect that you see sometimes, like in a puddle and like a petrol station or whatnot. And I was like, well, that's perfect, because this thing is supposed to be like the embodiment of pollution, and slime and sludge and whatnot. So when I was kind of experimenting with this, I tried originally in the model painting, trying to paint in the rainbow effect, and it looked all right, like it was good, and I think I did keep some of that into the final model. I can actually show you. I'll pull this to the side. Go here. So this is the clean rendered model. So this is what it kind of looked like before I started going in and playing with stuff. So you can see some of the rainbow effect in there that I kind of painted in by hand. But one of the things that really excited me was by accident, which was I accidentally clicked it onto thin film in Keyshot, which basically made the entire model translucent. But for me, I was just like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is a great kind of oil slick rendery kind of thing. And the way that I work is that in Keyshot is that I'll render out multiple passes, and have these JPEG images that then I take into Photoshop and I layer up, and I can paint certain elements out. And you can see here where I've kept certain bits in where it's like hinting with the rainbow patterns and whatnot, but I've taken out some of the harsher edges, of like the blue and stuff. But yeah, this is just kind of one of the ways that I develop through my artwork, is that I'll find really unique, interesting textures and styles and stuff, in Keyshot, and bring them into the process. So yeah, this is Muck, and I had a lot of fun doing that one.
Yeah, it
Uh,
looks great. And
Thank
happy
you.
accidents are always helpful. Yeah, when
Yeah,
this is awesome. I mean, it feels like an oil slick. It is incredible. So you
thank
do
you
a
very
lot
much.
of compositing, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. So like as I said, like with Photoshop, I bring in loads of different layers and do different things. A good example of that is my Rapidash, for example. So if I open this here, so this is Rapidash. Um, so there is, I mean, I'm sure that there are things in 3D programs, maybe even in ZBrush, I don't know, that do fire rendering and whatnot. Personally, I'm at this point where I'm there like, I cannot be bothered to learn a whole new program just for one specific thing. So most of my stuff is that I'm experimenting and trying to figure out how to do it in my own way. So with Rapidash, what I really wanted to kind of grasp was to get the glow of the fire, because the fire is quite easy. I can get some really wonderful photographs of fire on black backgrounds, and I can kind of make those translucent so you're just seeing the fire. But the hardest thing is when especially when you're working with 3D, is to get the glow of that light in the right places, make sure that it doesn't feel like it's blown out, and make it feel like it matches in with the overall scene. So what I did, and do bear with me. So this is a video, a real-time video of me working in Keyshot. So I'll just drag it to the timestamp I've got written down here. So you can see I've basically taken some sphere objects that I've imported through Keyshot, and turn them into area light, which is in the light category here, and added the colors. But it allows me to have so much control of where I want those glows to be, because it's not just about kind of going, well, this is on fire, so that needs to glow. It's a bit, it is concept art. So I'm trying to kind of create it look dynamic and interesting, and have the shadows really like unique, and kind of telling a story in a weird way. So yeah, and you can see how I add in multiple different ones. And what I'll do is I'll render each one of these light sources out individually, so then I have a lot more control in Photoshop. So if I go into the passes here, I'll just kind of highlight and open up some of these so you can see what I'm talking about. So that's one with all of them together. So I often have that as kind of my base, so that I know I can kind of refer back to it and know exactly where I'm putting the lighting, or kind of like what I was kind of imagining. But you can see where I've just taken each individual glow, um, so that when I go into Photoshop, I can make that brighter, I can make that darker, and make the saturation stronger, or the color or the hue. Um, and you can see here in Photoshop, here's another real-time video. Before I kind of like carry on, what I'll quickly say is that one of the passes that I do in Keyshot, which I find really useful, is a clown mask. And that will make a block color of each individual 3D model you have as a separate individual model. So that when it comes to Keyshot, I can use this as a way of selecting areas, without having to go in and like, cut it out or draw it or whatever. It's a
It
really
makes
quick,
things
simple
super
way of doing
fast. Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah.
Exactly. And so I'll just quickly kind of like jump through this so that we're not wasting too much time on this. But you can see where I'm layering the lighting here, and playing with different kind of things. So like, you might have multiple layers, or you might have color dodge, which I used here, which you get a far like stronger, richer color, or screen, which you can see what I'm playing with here. And yeah, and this whole thing is just experimentation, because certain things bring out different effects and different styles that you weren't even thinking of when you first started this. So yeah, there's a lot of play that comes into here. But you can see where I take these, sorry, I'm jumping around here, but you can see where I've taken these photos of fire, and I can manipulate them into how I want them to go. But the beauty of it is that I have clear reflections of this fire already baked into the image, so that I'm not kind of going in and then having to. So see, if I didn't have those, I would have the flat model, if I can just kind of find it as an example. So I'd have the flat model like this, and you could go in and paint that by hand and do all of that, but it takes time. And I'm not saying that's a bad way of doing it, but sometimes when you're working on a film, for example, they're like, hey, we need this done like ASAP. And you're like, okay, but take some time. They're like, yeah, we don't care. We've got a deadline. Get on with it. So for me, I'm always practicing to try and speed up my process as quickly as I possibly can, because that helps so much when it comes to working in a professional manner. But yeah, so yeah, you can see, and I'll go in and I'll start painting in some of these areas, just so that it's not doesn't feel too flat, and it doesn't I can kind of guide things in the way that I want it to go. But yeah, you can kind of get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. I think a lot of people who are like, particularly like your average industrial designer, I've done this myself. A lot of the time we're trying to just do like products really quickly because we need to just get somebody's buy-in real quick. And so a
Yeah.
lot of it is, quick drag and drop, make a material change, render it out. Great proof of concept. It's like minimum viable product, right? But then when I'm doing like marketing level renders, using those passes makes things so much easier. The clown pass, that thing is a godsend. And then on top of that, like, being able to separate my highlights and my bloom and all those different things, it just makes that final edit like way more dynamic when I'm post processing, and it speeds things up significantly.
Yeah, and you have so much more control over the image in the final render. Like, I've had friends who've been working on projects, and they've been, just going over the same thing over and over and over again, going like, I'm trying to get it, and they're like, honestly, you could have smashed this out in Keyshot in 2 minutes.
Yeah, I was not meant to be a digital illustrator, because every
Yeah.
time I do something like that, I will sit there and I will work on the same little square inch for hours, and I never get anywhere.
No, I know. Yeah, yeah. I used to be so. I've had to tell myself many times to go, just let it go. Just like stop being such a perfectionist and trying to get it as perfect as possible. But it's good to be able to have these processes where you can kind of speed through a thing, but also have the option to come in and do those finer details if you want to. But you can even see in this image, like I'm turning things off, turning things on again, trying to make sure that things aren't blown out. so it is a process, and it's something that I think a lot of people, especially younger artists, look at professionals and they go, oh well, they can just do it, that's they know exactly what they're doing and they do it immediately. But it's like, I half the stuff that I can do, in my sleep now, and if I don't say it like that, but it's stuff that I had to learn and really grind through and figure out myself, and trying to, like, through trial and error. um but yeah, it's a fun process.
Definitely. It's funny because I actually, I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday, I read a thing that said like it's think like a beginner. Always, there's no limit if you don't know what that limit is, right? If you're just
Yeah,
playing around and experimenting, sure, you might be breaking the rules, but if the outcome works, right? That's
yeah,
where you start building those tool sets that you can always fall back on, like on the concept of a professional can just jump in
yeah.
there and do it. I mean, they was literally just banging their head against the wall for a while until they figured it out.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's like, even like the greats in history had to figure it out at some point. It's not. I think what I say to, especially like kids and whatnot, or teenagers in schools and stuff, who often are quite frustrated with art because they're going like, but I want to draw cool robots, and they want me to draw a vase on a desk or something. And I'm like, yeah, and yeah, I get it. That can be frustrating if
Yeah.
that's not your vibe, but what you can do is take those rules that you're learning in the classroom. So maybe you're studying light and you're understanding how highlights work or how shadow works or something like that. You can then take that home with you and apply that immediately to your robot that you've been
100%.
working on, and you will see this, like, jump. It is, obviously it's frustrating when you're working on stuff that you're not interested in class, but it's all valuable, and it's all stuff you can translate directly to your own personal work. I mean, I've been lucky. Like, when I was in school, I had an art teacher who was quite flexible, and he used to say to me, like, look, if you, like, in class, we're going to be studying this, but if you want to draw a dinosaur, but as long as you're using the same like techniques, I'm cool with that.
Cool.
Like, and I think that's a really wonderful way of kind of looking at artwork in the long run, is kind of like translate it into something that you want, but still learn those fundamentals because they're really important.
Yeah, and it keeps people interested too, because people give up, like you said, when they're doing something that they don't want to do over and over and over and over again, it becomes a problem. Luckily for me, I really enjoyed pencil rendering cylinders, spheres, cones, and cubes,
Yeah.
so I have reams and reams of those.
Yeah. No, but I mean, that's the thing, because you find the thing that you love, and you work on that and you build on that. But I think, like we've talked about in education, like, it's can be stifling sometimes, and can really put you off the thing that you fell in love with originally,
Yeah.
if you're not being allowed to kind of play with that. But like me, like, I wasn't allowed to use 3D in my masters, but I came out the other side and I went, I'm gonna do it, and now I create 3D concept art for
Awesome.
for a living. So, you
Very
know,
awesome. And I remember you were telling me something about the fur, that how you put this together, because it was kind of
yeah,
difficult in ZBrush to get something that looked very realistic.
yeah,
Could you talk a little bit about that?
definitely. Well, actually, I've got my Ninetales picture here, so I'll just quickly show you this. So when I was originally working with fur, for the first time back in the day, back in 2017, I think was the first fur-based creature that I was really working on. Um, I thought I had to get all of the fur done in the renderer or in ZBrush, and they do have a interesting, hair tool. I think it's called Fiber Mesh or something like that. I can't really remember. Um, but when it rendered out, especially when I imported it into Keyshot, it looked a bit clunky. It looked a bit artificial. It took a lot of time for me to try and make, like, a lot of overlaying photographs and stuff like that to try and make them look realistic. And then a few years later, I was kind of like, and I did that for probably about 2 or 3 years, and like really kind of grinding through this. And then I kind of like discovered that I was like, well, why don't I try it a different way? Let me like start again and try something new. So the way that I worked was that I actually, I'll just quickly show you this. So I'm jumping around in topics here, but Um, One of the tools that I find that works really wonderfully in Keyshot is to create the background image that you're going to put your 3D model into first, so that you can get the lighting and everything, because then when you get that model in, you can match the lighting to the scene. So I'll often kind of like do this matte painting, um, do a bit of digital sketching, whatnot, and put a very loose sketch, as you can see here, in there, just so that I kind of know where I want it to sit in the scene. Um, and now I jump back into what I was talking about before. So what I decided I was going to do was actually start sculpting the fur directly into the model. Now, but I kind of did that before, like it was very loose, but obviously I was using the fiber mesh and I was layering that on top and trying to make sure that it was get flowing in the right way, and it doesn't really like the groom tools they have in ZBrush aren't very good. It kind of pulls it more towards the camera rather than the direction that you want it to go to. I'm sure that there's probably updates now that make it so much better, but I decided to go in a different direction and start sculpting the fur directly onto the model, and really going into some fine detail, as you can see here, using lots of different alphas and whatnot. So I'll just quickly jump through, but you can see what I'm doing there, where I'm kind of like dragging them in and creating these details. And I'll do that through the entire model. I'll just kind of jump through so you can see it's time consuming, but it's worth it in the end. So I'll do all of that, and then I'll render it in Keyshot. So this is something that I'll just kind of like touch on as well. I know I'm jumping around here, but honestly, it makes sense just to go with the flow of this.
Oh, of course.
So when I bring in the model into Keyshot, and again through Keyshot Bridge, because it's brilliant, I'll position it and get it into the direction that I want it. Let me just have a look here. So if I go to around here, yeah. So what I'll do is I want to get subsurface scattering. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's basically where light will enter into a thing. Like if you hold up your hand to a light and you can see it goes all pink and you can kind of see through it, that's subsurface scattering, because it goes into your skin and it bounces around. Same thing happens with hair, with different elements like skin and light and glass and whatnot. But I use the translucent effect in Keyshot and put, like you can see here, I've got this, I put the base color in, the subsurface color in there, and you can get these really wonderful warm tones. And it stops the model often looking really flat and looking almost like a plastic model. So I'll play with that, and I'll work with the lighting once I have that. And then once I have all of that, and I'll render out the passes and bring it into Photoshop. I'll start again. You can see I've got my clown mask going on there. Let me just have a look at my numbers here. Apologies. So yeah, so here you can see where I'll take basically a hairbrush or a fur brush in Photoshop, but I'll attach it to the blend tool, and I'll just start smudging it through. Now, because the way that Keyshot is like rendered all of the colors and everything like that, as you drag it through, it blends those colors together and actually ends up looking a lot more like real fur. Now, obviously, when you've got to trust the process, because when you first start, you're there like, oh God, what am I doing? Am I ruining my picture? But as you go through, I can kind of show you here. You start working it through, and you make sure that you're working to the directions of the fur within the model. And there's obviously use reference images as much as you possibly can. If you've got loads of photographs of, in this case, foxes and wolves and whatnot, study the fur, figure out which way that fur is growing. Because if you just kind of blindly go, it'll look weird and fuzzy, and it won't look right, and it will look like a blur. But if you can guide it in the direction, that's perfect. And I'll also go in, once I've done that, I'll go in and with my digital brush and I'll paint in some like individual hairs and really kind of get that kind of natural fur look, so it doesn't look really artificial and painted.
Yeah.
and I'll do that through the entire model. And if I go back to the original picture,
What's nice is even when you're kind of smudging it and blending it, you're still getting that variation of highlights and shadows since they're already kind of baked in there. And I just like
yeah,
seeing you use this as kind of a base model, because a lot of the time, people think of Keyshot as like that's the final thing, right? I've already done everything. I'm getting into Keyshot and I'm spitting it out. And like there's so many ways you could use Keyshot as a base to build things. I mean, like I personally, when I'm doing sketches, sometimes I'll literally just use like a tune material or a blank color on an object, and then I print it out in a grid and I sketch over it for details. So
yeah,
it's great
exactly.
seeing this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've said that there was a guy that I knew who he used Keyshot he just basically blocked these things out. He's an environments artist, and we were talking over a cup of tea on a break once, and I was just like, so how do you do your things? Because his stuff looked very traditionally drawn.
Mhm.
I said, but I've seen you working with Keyshot before, and he was like, yeah, well, actually, what I do is that like all of your shapes and cones and blocks and stuff is like I block out the entire scene just with shapes. And then I can take that into Keyshot and I can light it. And because of using like HDRI lighting and whatnot, you can get some really wonderful lighting in there. And he'll render those out. And he's not going for the fine polished models like I was like out of
Mhm.
Keyshot. He's just using it for lighting reference and shapes. So then he'll take that into Photoshop and then he'll draw over all of this in fine detail. But he has everything laid out for him. He has all the
Love that.
shadows, he has all the lighting, the highlights, and everything. I was just like, that's brilliant. He even uses a lot of the lighting that he's done in Keyshot as a pass that he puts over the top of his images,
Very
so
cool.
that then the lighting looks even more crisp and wonderful. And I was just like, that is a really unique way of using Keyshot that I
Yeah, I
have.
was gonna say I wouldn't have thought of that. That's pretty awesome. I love finding things out like that because then I tend to kind of play around and experiment and incorporate, and so the more tools I have in my tool bag, always a good thing.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think the great thing as well about like things like Keyshot is that you can work with perspective and you can work with like laying out a whole scene and creating like well, I mean, just like you might say if you have a scene and you have a building over here and you have a building over here and you go looks a bit flat. Now, if you've drawn that by hand, that that's a huge amount of time you've essentially
Mhm.
wasted because you then have to redraw that again. But you can go into Keyshot and you can just be like, I'm just going to pull this closer. Great, that actually makes this scene a lot more dynamic. And I can put in a character that I can use as a base model into here just to kind of as a filler, and I can move that character around in the scene wherever I want, and then you can take that out. So I think it can be used as an incredible tool rather than just being like this is just a renderer. It's like no, no, no. It can be used in so many different ways.
Yeah, I mean you can totally ideate. You can iterate all inside a Keyshot. It's pretty awesome when you kind of get away from what you expect it to be and start kind of playing around with it. Do you
100%.
do you use HDRI lighting over physical lights most of the time? Because I know you use the physical lights to actually do the kind of fire glow effect, but your overall scenes, are you using HDRIs or physical lights?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's a bit of a blend.
Okay.
So I'll use HDRI lighting like for the overall scene. They're great for natural lighting as well. I mean, I know that there's a huge amount of studio based lighting that you can get in there, but obviously my stuff is supposed to be in a forest or on a beach or
Yeah.
something like that. So you can get these wonderful scenes and it gives you a really base, like a strong base lighting. But then what I'll do is I'll go in with shapes like you saw in the Rapidash one and create dynamic lighting and kind of use that just to make certain elements like pop. If I want the eye to be drawn towards the head, for example, I want like here with the nine tails, I want there to be a stronger highlight on the top of the head and on the side of the head because I want my eyes to be drawn there, but it also allows your eye to flow through the image. So you start with the head because you're naturally drawn to things like eyes and noses and mouths and whatnot. So you start there, and then you kind of visually drawn through the image along to the tail. So then I added another highlight, like an artificial highlight in there at the tail, just to kind of draw your eye across the screen.
100%.
So yeah, it's having that combination is great because you can have a lot more control of what you want people to look at. I mean, that's specifically for me as a concept artist, because
Mhm.
my pictures are supposed to tell a story, or they're supposed to show off a certain thing. But that can be used in so many different ways. I mean, if you're doing, say, if you're rendering a car, for example, like you can have the HDRI lighting just to kind of get a really nice glow. But if you want to get some really nice pops of highlights and stuff like that,
Mhm.
you can bring in these manual lighting, or whatever you want to call it.
That's
And
exactly what I do.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I use a combination too. Like I'm often, I have like a general base lighting that I'll do, so everything's kind of nice and illuminated. You can see the curvature or whatever, and then I'll jump in with some physical lights and spotlight, a curve on a vehicle, a rim, a wheel, whatever it is. Some element that I'm trying to bring attention to or accentuate. But
yeah,
and for those of you not familiar, like the big difference is HDRI lighting is like image based. Physical lights are kind of realistically photon mapped within the program. And at the end of the day, you're going to get a slightly more realistic lighting experience with physical lights because it casts shadow in a very natural way. HDRI lighting is a little bit more flat the way it lights things, but physical lights require a lot more computing power
yeah,
than HDRIs do, right? So
yeah.
that working with
I've
that
had some
combination is
scenes.
good.
Yeah, I've had some scenes where I put in so many physical lights that it's just like,
It
like
just comes to a halt.
yeah, exactly. It's just like grinding through the scene. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
changing the camera is going to be a nightmare.
And I have a pretty powerful computer, and I've still had those issues when I've gotten out of control, especially on bigger scenes. If you're doing like a full interior of a
Yeah,
building and you have to light that entire interior, an HDRI isn't going to really work because you're inside, right? So the HDRI
exactly.
might cast some light through a window, but the entire interior is going to be physical lights. And then if you start doing like a interior lighting mode and you're scattering light everywhere and you have glass, and then oh my god, it
Yeah.
sounds like my computer's ready to go to the moon at that point.
You get that fan noise going.
Yep. Can't even think over it. Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
No, but
no,
these
exactly. No,
are
it's
they're
wonderful.
awesome.
Yeah.
And then
Um,
you had another one too. Was it Magic Carp? That was the
it
other one.
was Magic Cup. So one of the things is, like, I was exploring water. And I think most of my water Pokemon originally, I was kind of putting either underwater, or I was kind of like having them sat on, like, this, like on a beach or something like that. And I could get some wonderful glossy elements with that, and I think they look great. But I always kind of shied away from like anything like water splashes or actual water and stuff, because it was intimidating. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't really want to draw it, because that's like trying to figure out how to draw fire. There's so many increment. I mean, you could just look at this picture here at the bottom. It's like there's just so much going on. To try and hand paint that is insane. And even like people who do those really hyper realistic paintings that
I
you
was
see.
just thinking that.
Yeah, where you've got like people with water falling across their face or
The
whatever.
droplets and
Um,
everything on the
yeah,
glasses or something. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
crazy, yeah. And I've looked at it and go, how do you do that? And then I realized that they're working off a photograph, and
Mhm.
they cut it up into loads and loads of little grids. And then they're painting each one of those in the grids to kind of build out the entire picture. So I was just like, to quickly hand draw water is intense. So I really wanted to explore that in Keyshot and figure out if there's ways, because Keyshot's got some wonderful water textures and glass textures and whatnot. So with Magikarp, I wanted it jumping out of the water exactly like this. And I was really trying to play around with it, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then one of the things that I realized that I could do was actually sculpt the water in ZBrush using some brushes that I found. You can find them. I think they're still up. I think it's just ZBrush water splash brushes. And they're really cheap, if not free. I can't remember where I got them. I do apologize. I would like to shout out the original artist who created them, but I can't remember. But you'd find it. But you can see here. So I started sculpting all of this in ZBrush. And the base stuff was more just me pushing and pulling and doing bits and pieces and whatnot. And then I added in these splashes brushes. But what I wanted was that the way that water works, please do excuse my kind of rough stuff with this video. Um, the way that water works, if I go back here and pause it, is that when something's jumping out of water or being pulled out of water, you get that kind of drag of the water that's coming behind it. if you just had this like this, if I just rendered it like that and the water there, it doesn't really feel realistic because there would be water coming off this fish, you know. So the way that I experimented with it was that I took the original model, duplicated it, so it was the same model on top of each other. Obviously, changed the color so that I could see it really clearly, and then I would and added some splash brushes onto there. But then, as you can see here, I'm just kind of like pushing the original model into the other one,
Mm-hmm.
so that then it's kind of almost like painting out areas. Um, and yeah, so then I could get that kind of pull of water coming off this thing. So that when I took it into KeyShot, which I will go into now, you can see I then turned all of that put that onto a glass texture and was able to get this amazing water splash thing. And it feels like there is a layer of water over this body, but then the exposed bit, I can get the nice gloss. So it all blends in really beautifully together, even in this is the clean renderer and in KeyShot, and it still looks fantastic. Whereas certain programs, maybe you'd have to do it, but you have to like let it render, and then you get to see whether or not it actually is any good. Whereas having the real time viewing window in KeyShot has been absolutely amazing, and you're still getting incredible things. Like you can see where I can turn it off here, and then I can turn it back on again, and it still looks wonderful. But you see what I mean? If I just pause it there, you can kind of see without that splash, it looks almost artificial. Like it still looks good, don't get me wrong, like the gloss looks great, blah blah blah, but my brain isn't necessarily going, that feels like it's in motion, like it
100%.
feels like it's still. Whereas as soon as you add the water back in, it feels like it's in motion suddenly.
100%.
So yeah, so that's another way that I've used KeyShot in a really unique way.
Now, for that one, did you? Because I noticed, I mean, now it makes total sense. When I was looking at it originally, I was like, man, how did he get such a glossy cover? Did you use like a label and make that glass and so on and so forth? But you really just composited two models together,
Yeah.
and it's kind of what's creating that exterior gloss layer. Very cool.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, that's experimentation, because I didn't have, there's not a tutorial, not one that I could find anyway,
Yeah.
that kind of talks you through that and go, hey, here's how to render out a jumping fish. So I get to play with this, and that's part of the joy of it.
It's
Obviously,
fun.
it's frustrating sometimes, but
Oh yeah, it can definitely be. I've run into some walls, but no, and it's fun because like I've done similar things. I had to render out a tattoo ink bottle for a friend of
yeah,
mine, and he wanted it to sit inside of like a pile of ink powder, raw ink powder, and I can't render powder in SolidWorks. So I'm working off of this model. I can't make too many adjustments. And so I started playing around with just compositing the models and making it look like it was stuck inside, messing with scale, duplicating. And it's pretty incredible what you can come up with just by kind of breaking the rules, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's a very good thing. Is to say it's like people really get stuck in their ways on how to do certain things, and sometimes it's just they're like just experiment, just have fun with it, and sometimes you'll find some amazing things. I mean, like half of like the tutorials online of these programs, including KeyShot, it come from someone who was like, hey, I was messing around and I managed to create this. Is actually, I don't have any reference imaging to talk about this one, but I remember I was working on like an underwater scene years ago, and I wanted to get the caustic lighting, that kind of like fragmented light that you get from the waves underneath the water onto this creature. And the way that I did that was I created a layer in KeyShot, created that clear glass, changed the opacity just a little bit, and then put a fractal distortion on it so that you get these wave bumps. And then through that, then I could use one of the physical lighting to go through it, and I created caustic lighting, which I was like, I didn't even know that this was even possible to do. And then later on, KeyShot made it even simpler for me by creating I can't remember what they're called. What's it? It's kind of like a you put kind of like a screen in front of the spotlight, and then you can, and then what the light comes through
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I do apologize. I can't remember what it's
No,
called.
you and me both right now.
Yeah, yeah. But it's fantastic. I've used that for like dappled lighting with like in trees, like in a forest. I've used it for that purpose. I've used it for caustic lighting. I think I've even used it quite possibly. Yeah. So I used the caustic lighting here, and this is the image that I used for the stamp for the Royal Mail. But you can see the caustic lighting here on top of the on top of the Cryptoclidus, the plesiosaur dinosaur here. But yeah, that was all using those masks, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. But I wouldn't have even thought. I think even when Keyshot advertised it, it was more about creating like a solid pattern
Hmm.
with the lighting. And but then my brain went, there's so many natural things that I could do with that. I think I even used it once for like glowing embers, which was really interesting because obviously usually I would just paint
That's
those in or overlay
yeah,
them
yeah.
and stuff. But I wanted to see what it might look like if I had that through, and it looked really wonderful. But yeah, there's lots of things that you can do and learn and find
Yeah,
out
I've
about.
I've used it for dappled lighting quite often. That's generally what I do when I'm masking. When it's like a light mask or texture mask. I don't know
Yeah,
what the tool is.
but we're rubbish. We should know
I
this.
know, right?
Should be
Oh
prepared.
man, and I work here, so.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm just wearing the t-shirt. That's all.
But no, it's awesome because like especially when I'm like I like to create stylized renders if I'm doing like a shoe, if it's supposed to be outside, or like a hydro flask water bottle type situation, and then I'll kind of use the like leaves so it looks like there's light being cast through a tree, and it's pretty incredible what you can do
No,
inside of
definitely.
Keyshot. And I know you mentioned it earlier, but it's really from the softwares I've used, I think it's like got a really low barrier to start jumping in there and creating a lot of things. It's one of the, I mean, I've even taken some of the salespeople we've had and showed them some basic stuff, and within a couple hours, they're making something.
Yeah.
And that's usually pretty difficult with creative programs to kind of jump in that quickly. I mean, when I was in design school, our introduction to Keyshot was literally my teacher having us import a model into Keyshot from SolidWorks, and he's like, "All right, this is how you unlink materials. Here's a bunch of materials. Go ahead and drag them, drop them in there, and then here are your environments. All right, good luck, everybody. We'll have a competition to see who did the best job after lunch." And that was it. That was the introduction to Keyshot. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
3 sentences.
I mean, yeah, and that's why I recommend Keyshot to so many people, because it is one of those things that you can like pick up in like a few hours if you really wanted to. Um, Whereas like, there's certain programs out there, I don't want to say anything bad about any other programs or anything like that, but um, there's a lot that goes. I think I was experimenting with Unreal Engine 5, which is an incredible program, don't
Mhm.
get me
Yeah, I
wrong.
played around with it as well.
But yeah, but when it comes to like creating textures and whatnot like that, I found it really complicated to try and figure it out. And like, they're like, well, you could drag and link that, and I kind of understood it, and I could see how it could be simple once you kind of figured it out.
Mhm.
But I was like, for the speed that I would want to use it for, especially for my work, because I thought actually it's got really wonderful tools in terms of I think it's Quixel, or they're called
Yeah,
Megascans
Quixel
now.
Bridge or whatever. I
Yeah,
forget.
yeah, the like the photo
Yeah,
scans and
yeah.
stuff. I was like, if I could use that for some of my backgrounds and stuff, I think that would be fantastic. So I did start playing with it. It doesn't really like Max very
Mhm.
much. But yeah, as soon as I got in there and it was just like, yeah, you have to connect this to this and connect this, I was like, I don't have time to learn all of this. Like, this is really hard. Whereas the first time I opened Keyshot, even back in the day when, in the early days of Keyshot, I picked it up immediately. Like, I was just like, yep, this is it. This is the program that I'm going to be using. And obviously, as soon as I had Keyshot Bridge, I was just like, I'm not using anything else.
Awesome. Well, this is all awesome. This is such great work. This is incredible. And it's really refreshing to see Keyshot used in a different way because I mean, as an industrial designer, I'm always thinking about Keyshot from a product perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my brain is at most of the time when I'm in here. So whenever I come across like character designers and creature designers, even like ArcViz designers and the way they use Keyshot, it's always awesome to kind of see what they're doing, how they're doing it, because we're all kind of working towards the same thing, but because of the nature of what we're rendering, we just approach it in so many different ways. And it's always mind-blowing when you have the exact same toolbox, like the same constraints, yet everybody approaches it in completely different ways. So
Yeah.
it's always pretty inspiring to see that.
Definitely. Completely agree. I
Hey,
mean,
oh, go ahead, go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, and I think there's going to be even more wonderful things over the horizon that is going to be coming to Keyshot that I'm going to get really excited about and be like, right, I'm going to be trying this, I'm going to be doing this and whatnot.
Well,
So yeah,
keep on the lookout, because we definitely have some fun tools coming in. Some that also apply to some of the things that you were doing. I don't want to talk about them too much yet until I get at least a beta in my hands to
yeah,
play around with it.
you
But
get big excited.
yeah. But I think there's some fun stuff coming over the next couple of years. So
Awesome.
definitely keep out on the lookout for that. Well, hey, I think we should probably wrap it up at this point. It's been a little while. Joshua, I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to kind of put all this together for us. I know it's never a easy thing, especially when you're as busy of a person as you are, and you got so much stuff going on.
Oh, okay. No, well, no, thank you for inviting me. Like, I genuinely love talking about this kind of stuff. Like, I get so excited, even when I go to like Comic Cons and whatnot. I'll end up like talking to someone about like the details and the programs that I use, and realize that I'm ignoring all of the other customers that are my wife, my brother and stuff, and they're like, do you want to serve someone? I'm like, sorry, we're just chatting. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I just
no,
want to talk about
thank
this.
you so much for
No, we really appreciate it. We'll put your socials in the YouTube description so that
yeah.
anyone can connect with you across everything. But if you have any, like, I know you go to shows, your website, your Kickstarter, whatever you want to plug, feel free to just let everybody know where they can find all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, my socials is most of them are Josh Dunlop concept artists. So if you Google that, you'll probably find most of my stuff. Um, I think Twitter, I mean, it's X now, I guess it's called, is JRR Dunlop because Josh Dunlop concept artist is too long, apparently. And yeah, I've recently released a book with all of my Pokemon artwork. So if you're really interested in that and would like to get a copy, you can go to my Etsy page. And yeah, I'll be doing a few Comic Cons. I've got MCM London at the end of May, which I'm really excited about. We've got loads of stuff. I've got lots of prints. I've got the books, obviously. I also have a side project which I do called Old World Magic, where we've got kind of film level quality props for magical stuff. So if you're into like D&D, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, that kind of stuff, we've got loads of cool stuff: potions, wands, handmade wands by my father, bless him. So yeah, so come and check us out if you're in London.
Can't confirm those ones are pretty freaking cool. So yeah, definitely. So we'll stick all your socials and your links up in the description, and then hopefully everybody can connect. And maybe the next time I'm in London, we can connect. But
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
on that note, again, I really appreciate you being here. Appreciate everybody being here as well. Make sure to stay tuned for our upcoming webinars and our new content. And we really look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Thanks, everybody.